Montana Territory, June 1882. The wind carried the smell of pine and gunpowder as the sun dropped behind the Bitterroot Mountains, casting long shadows across the dry earth. Laurel Kincaid gripped the reins tighter, her eyes set on the crumbling outline of the ranch house ahead, the one she used to call home. Her heart pounded hard and fast, like it was remembering something her mind wasn't ready to face. 2 children waited inside that house. Her children, Colby and Clara, ages 6 and 4, abandoned by the man who swore he would never leave them. Laurel's husband had packed up a month ago, left a note on the kitchen table, and rode off with a saloon dancer from Helena. No goodbye, no apology, just gone. Laurel had been in Missoula, working as a laundress, scrubbing shirts and skirts until her fingers bled. She'd sent every dollar home. But when the letters stopped coming, she borrowed a mule and rode 2 days straight to get back. She had not expected the ranch to be overgrown and silent, or for her children to answer the door with hollow eyes and dirt-smudged cheeks. "Ma!" Colby had blinked up at her, voice hoarse. "You came back." Laurel had dropped to her knees and pulled them both into her arms. "I never left you," she whispered, kissing their tangled hair. "I never would." But the truth was, the ranch was falling apart. The horses were gone. The well was low, and she had nothing left but the clothes on her back, 2 hungry children, and a broken fence line stretching clear to Idaho. The next morning, she loaded Clara onto her hip and walked Colby to the edge of the property, scanning the empty road. She needed help, not charity, not someone telling her she should remarry and be grateful for it. Real help. A man who could fix a fence, shoot straight, and not run at the first hard thing. That was when she saw him. He was seated on a buckskin horse, dust on his boots and a rifle slung across his saddle. His hat was tilted low, hiding his face, but when he lifted his head, Laurel froze. "Kayson Daugherty?" Her voice cracked. He blinked, surprised. Laurel Kincaid? They had not seen each other in 8 years. Not since she married someone else and he rode off to Texas to break horses. He looked older now, broader. A scar split his left eyebrow, and his eyes, they were the same deep green she remembered, held something quieter, something heavier. "I heard about the trouble," he said, dismounting. "Thought I might lend a hand." She stared at him, unsure whether to run or reach for him. "Why would you do that?" He looked over her shoulder, toward the sagging porch and the 2 children clinging to the doorway. "Because you look like you could use something real." She swallowed hard. "I do not want a fairy tale," she said, her voice low. He met her eyes then, firm and steady. "Good. I want something real." For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Laurel nodded slowly and stepped aside. He stayed. That night, after the children fell asleep, Kayson sat on the porch sharpening a knife. Laurel leaned against the wooden post, arms crossed, watching him. "You always know how to show up at the worst moments," she said. He gave a short laugh. "I do not plan it that way. You really came all this way just to help?" "I came because I heard you were on your own. And because I remember what it felt like to want something and lose it." Laurel looked down, fingers gripping the hem of her skirt. "I lost a lot." "I know." She sat beside him, the boards creaking under their weight. The air smelled like sage and smoke. He handed her the knife and a piece of leather to work at. She accepted it without a word. They sat like that for a long time. The next morning, Kayson was up before dawn, chopping wood and mending the front gate. Laurel found him shirtless by the barn, sweat already running down his back as he hammered new boards across the broken doorway. She paused, heart thudding. Colby ran up beside her. "Ma, is he gonna stay?" She looked at her son, then at the man working in the golden morning light. "I do not know," she said, "but I think he might." By the 3rd day, fences were upright again. The well had been redug, and Clara had stopped crying at night. Kayson did not speak much, but he never left. He fixed what needed fixing, taught Colby how to hold a rifle, and carried Clara on his shoulders when her legs got tired. Laurel watched him from the kitchen window, something easing in her chest every time he laughed with the children. One evening, after supper, Laurel found him behind the barn, hammering a new beam into place. "You could have gone anywhere," she said. He wiped his brow and looked at her. "I did not want anywhere. I wanted here." Laurel stepped closer. "Why?" He dropped the hammer, his eyes not leaving hers. "Because I used to dream about this. About you. And now I am here, and you are standing in front of me, and I do not want to waste another minute pretending I do not still love you." Her breath caught. "Kayson, I know it is not a fairy tale. There is no magic, no prince, just me, and you, and two kids who deserve better than what they have had." She stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not want a fairy tale." "Good," he said again. Then he reached out and brushed her hair behind her ear. "Because I want something real." She leaned into his hand, her eyes closing. And for the first time in years, she let herself hope. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, something real could be enough. By the end of the first week, the quiet between them had changed shape, not the silence of strangers, but the kind that held room for breath, thought, and the slow turning of trust. Laurel had taken to rising earlier, brushing out Clara's hair while the sun crept over the ridge. Kayson would already be outside, splitting kindling or checking the fence posts that still leaned too far east. That morning, she stepped onto the porch with a tin cup of coffee and found him crouched beside the wheelbarrow, oiling the rust from its axle. She walked down the steps barefoot, gravel pressing into her soles. "You always fix things with this much care?" she asked, handing him the cup. He sat back on his heels, took a sip, and nodded once. "If it's worth keeping." She studied the way his hands moved, capable, deliberate, without waste. Her husband's hands had never learned the shape of work that lasted. Colby came running from the barn, both hands full of wild onions. "Got enough for stew, Ma?" Laurel took the bundle and ruffled his hair. "Go wash your hands, then help me peel them." Kayson stood and brushed the dirt from his trousers. "I'll bring in the last of the oats. Sacks are still in the loft." She glanced at him. "That ladder's near to falling apart." He gave a short nod and walked off, and she watched his back until he disappeared inside the barn. Inside the kitchen, Colby climbed onto the stool without being told, scrubbing the onions with his palms. Clara sat on a flour sack beside the stove, humming to herself as she sorted beans by color. Laurel stirred the pot slowly, the scent of broth and thyme thickening in the air. Her shoulders ached, but it was a good ache, the kind that followed a day spent doing what needed doing. That evening, as the stew cooled and the children played in the dirt yard under the last of the light, Laurel found Kayson behind the barn again, this time mending a bridle strap. "You're not good at sitting still, are you?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Not when there's work staring me down." She leaned against the post, arms folded. "You always this steady?" He slid the needle through the leather, then paused. "No, not always." He tied off the thread and let the strap fall into his lap. The silence between them stretched, the air soft with the smell of earth cooling after heat. "I got into a fight once," he said, voice low, "down near Abilene. Man came at me with a bottle. I left him with a limp. Thought I'd feel proud. I didn't." Laurel watched him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you looked at me yesterday like I was something solid. And I want you to know I ain't always been." She stepped closer, her boots scuffing the dirt. "You think I'm looking for a man without flaws?" He shook his head. "I think you're looking for someone who won't leave." Laurel's voice caught in her throat. She forced it out. That's not a flaw. That's a promise. He stood, not quickly, but with the kind of strength born from carrying weight for a long time. I don't make promises I can't keep, he said. She held his gaze. Then don't say anything yet. I wasn't going to, he replied. From the front of the house, Clara called out, her voice high and clear. Ma, the stars are out. Laurel stepped back. She likes being the first to see them. Kayson nodded. Smart girl. She is. She started to turn, then paused. You're different than I remember. He looked down at the strap in his hands. So are you. She left him there in the dusk, sewing leather beneath a sky that was just beginning to bloom with stars. Later that night, while the children slept curled together on the straw mattress, Laurel stood outside staring at the moon. She didn't hear Kayson approach until his hand rested lightly on the porch rail beside hers. Do you miss it? He asked. She didn't look over. Miss what? Before. She waited a long time before answering. No, I think I only miss the idea of what I thought it was. He nodded, barely. Ideas can be dangerous like that. She turned to face him. But real things, they grow slow. His eyes held hers, steady and clear. And they don't scare easy. A breeze stirred the hem of her dress, lifted the scent of pine from the trees beyond the fields. She didn't step away. Neither did he. And though no one spoke it aloud, something passed between them, then not a vow, not yet, but the beginning of one. A weight shifting from one heart to another, shared without demand. In the quiet, the stars kept burning. The wheatgrass had grown high along the north pasture, brushing against Laurel's skirt as she walked the fence line with a coil of wire balanced on her hip. The morning was overcast, the kind of dull gray that made every color seem richer, greens deeper, earth darker, the air smelling faintly of wet stone. She'd left Colby and Clara with the neighbor's eldest girl, a quiet teenager who came by each Thursday to help in exchange for eggs and a jar of lard. Laurel didn't like leaving them, but she needed the quiet, and the fence needed mending. Kayson was already ahead, crouched near a post that leaned slightly to the east. He didn't look up when she joined him, just passed her the pliers and gestured toward the loose staple. She knelt beside him in the grass, skirts catching on the burrs, and pressed the wire flush with the post. You've got a touch for this, he said, adjusting the tension with a practiced hand. Laurel twisted the staple into place. I watched my father do it every spring. He used to say a fence line tells you what kind of man lives behind it. Kayson nodded, testing the stretch. He wasn't wrong. They moved down the line in companionable silence, save for the occasional grunt of effort or the creak of leather. The rhythm soothed her setting, stretching, stapling. Each post upright was another thing made right. When they reached the end of the row, she straightened and stretched her back, rubbing at the small of it. You always take the heaviest side, she said. I don't mind the weight, he said, long as it's shared. She glanced sideways at him. Is that how you see this? He met her eyes. I see it for what it is. Place that's been hurt, folks who've been left, and a woman who keeps standing when others would fall. Laurel looked away, jaw tightening. You don't have to say things like that. I don't say anything I don't mean. They started the walk back. A meadowlark sang from a fence post, and the distant ridge was blurred by mist. Laurel watched the way Kayson moved, shoulders even, steps measured. You carry something, she said at last. He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. A man doesn't ride as long as I have without trailing ghosts. She drew her shawl tighter. You going to tell me about them? He hesitated. One was my brother. Died in Kansas. Bank robbery gone wrong. He wasn't part of it, not really. Just caught in it. Laurel stopped walking. I'm sorry. So was I. For a long time. He ran a hand through his hair. He was younger than me, always chasing trouble. I thought I could keep him from it. You couldn't. I know that now, but I didn't then. The wind picked up slightly, brushing past them with the scent of damp soil and crushed sage. Laurel stepped closer. You came here to build something? She asked. I came because I was tired of watching things fall apart. They stood there a long moment, the only sound the rustle of grass and the creak of the newly mended fence. Later that afternoon, Laurel found herself in the root cellar, hands buried in burlap sacks, counting out the last of the winter potatoes. She heard steps above and called out without looking. I'm down here. Kayson's boots appeared on the top step. There's a man at the gate. She straightened. What does he want? Hard to say. Looks like a peddler. Got a wagon with tools and stitching kits. Laurel brushed her hands on her apron. I'll come up. The peddler had a slight stoop and a wide grin that showed 3 gold teeth. He tipped his hat when she approached and gestured to his wagon. Got needles, thread, good canvas, even a grindstone if you need it. Laurel ran her fingers over the edge of a folded bolt of muslin. How much for the cloth? For you, miss. 5 cents the yard. She turned to Kayson. We can spare that? He nodded. We've got enough from the horse sale. She didn't ask how much he'd gotten for the gelding. Just paid the man and took the cloth, folding it carefully under her arm. After the wagon rattled off down the road, she turned to Kayson. You didn't tell me you sold one. You needed the money. You didn't ask me first. I didn't think I had to. Laurel looked down at the muslin. That was your horse. It was a horse, he said. You're more than that to me. She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. That evening, after the children were asleep and the fire had burned low, Laurel sat at the table threading a needle through the muslin, shaping something small and square. Kayson leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. What are you making? A pillow. Clara's gone without one long enough. He watched the way her hands moved, quick and certain. You're good with a needle. I've done enough mending to know what holds and what doesn't. Kayson stepped forward, his voice quiet. And what about people? She looked up. They're harder. He nodded. They are. But I think we're doing all right. She set the needle down, fingers resting lightly on the fabric. I don't know what comes next, she said. I do, he said. We keep choosing this. She stood slowly. You sure? I've never been more. He reached for her hand, and she let him. For the first time, she didn't pull back. Outside, the wind shifted north and the clouds began to break, revealing a sliver of moonlight. Inside, Laurel leaned into Kayson's shoulder, and they stood together in the hush of a home being rebuilt not by luck, not by dreams, but by the steady hands of 2 people who had learned the shape of real things. The first rain of July came just before dawn, soft and steady, tapping against the roof like a hushed confession. Laurel stood barefoot in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a warm basin, watching the fields darken through the window. The oats would take the water well, the lettuces too. She'd planted them late, but they were coming into themselves now, stubborn and green. Behind her, the floor creaked. She didn't turn. You always wake this early? Kayson's voice was quiet, still low with sleep. Only when something's coming, she said. Rain like this never comes alone. He crossed the room and leaned beside her at the window, the 2 of them framed by the smell of soap and damp ash. She could feel the heat of his skin, though he didn't touch her. He didn't need to. Storms back in Texas came sudden, he said. Sky'd go green, air would go still as bone. Then the wind would tear straight through you. She nodded. Here it builds slower. Gives you time to wonder if it'll pass or settle in for the week. Kayson looked at her hands. You've been favoring your left side. She set down the basin. There's a pull in my shoulder. Comes and goes. I can take the heavier work for a while. Laurel shook her head. I don't want to be waited on. That's not what I meant, he said gently. I mean, I want to carry what I can. That's all. She studied him a long moment. You ever think about staying, Kayson? Not just for now. For good. He didn't answer right away. Just reached past her for the towel and dried the basin. I think about building something that doesn't end when the season does, he said. But I've never had a place that asked me to stay. Laurel turned from the window. I'm asking. He looked at her then. Really looked. You sure? I wouldn't say it if I wasn't. Outside, the rain steadied into a low rhythm, soft as breath. Kayson set down the towel and stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. Then I won't go. Later that day, Laurel saddled the mule and rode into town with Clara balanced in front of her. Colby stayed behind with Kayson, too proud to admit he liked the man well enough to spend a day alone with him. They had a list of chores to tackle: stacking the firewood, patching the back of the chicken coop, and Kayson had promised to show the boy how to check the traps along the creek. Laurel needed flour and salt, and she meant to ask the seamstress if she had any buttons left from last winter. Clara wanted a peppermint stick, and Laurel had 2 pennies tucked in her apron for it. When they reached the general store, Laurel tied the mule to the post and lifted Clara down. The child clung to her skirt, wide-eyed in the bustle of wagons and voices. Laurel kept a hand on her shoulder as they stepped inside. The storekeeper, a man named Thorne with thinning hair and a polite nod, glanced up from his ledger. Morning, Mrs. Kincaid. She didn't correct him, not because it was true, but because it was easier that way. Need flour, she said, and salt. And if you've got any dried apples left from last haul, I'll take those too. Thorne nodded and turned to gather the goods. Clara tugged her sleeve. Ma, can I pick the candy? Laurel smiled, just a little. 1 piece. Back at the ranch, dusk had come by the time she returned. The yard smelled of cut wood and roasting meat. Colby ran out to greet her, his cheeks flushed. We got a rabbit, Ma, and he showed me how to skin it proper. Kayson stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands on his trousers. He did most of it himself. Laurel untied the mule and lifted Clara down. She fell asleep halfway back. Can you carry her? Kayson took the child with care, cradling her against his shoulder like he'd done it 100 times. She's lighter than she looks. She's growing. Laurel watched them walk inside, her throat tightening in a way she hadn't expected. That night, after the children were in bed and the fire burned low, they sat at the table again, this time with a ledger open between them. Kayson traced a finger down the column of figures. You've been keeping it all in your head? Only way I've ever done it. He nodded slowly. You've got a head for numbers. I've got a head for survival, she said. That's not quite the same. It is if you're building something that lasts. Laurel looked at the page, then at him. You think this could last? Kayson leaned back, eyes steady. I think anything can if it's built honest. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Even after everything we've lost? He reached across the table, palm up. Especially then. She laid her hand in his. The rain had stopped. The air outside was still, but inside the house, something had shifted. Not sudden, not loud, just real, just hers. And it was enough. The late summer heat had settled into the land, thick and slow, making every movement feel deliberate. Laurel stood in the barn loft with her sleeves rolled past her elbows, sorting through the last bundles of rye straw they'd stacked before the rain. The sun filtered in through the slats, catching in the dust and turning the air gold. She paused to push a lock of hair from her brow, listening to the low thud of Kayson's boots below. He was checking the harnesses again, oiling the cracked ones with a tin of rendered tallow he'd traded for at the end of July. He didn't know she was up there yet. "I think we've got 2 good plow collars left," he called. "The rest'll need stitching or tossing." Laurel stepped to the edge of the loft. "I can mend the worst of them, if the leather isn't split too deep." He looked up, shielding his eyes. "You planning to start a second life as a harness maker?" "I plan to do what needs doing, same as always." He smiled, then not wide, not showy, just the kind that settled quiet into his face. "Come down a while. I've got news." She climbed down the ladder carefully, wiping her hands on the side of her skirt. "What kind?" He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "Came in with the mail rider. I didn't open it yet." Laurel took it from him, her fingers brushing his for the briefest second. The seal had been broken already, likely by Thorne at the store, who had a habit of reading letters aloud if you didn't mind. This one was addressed to her in her father's careful handwriting. She sat on the hay bale by the door and read it once, then again more slowly. Kayson waited beside her, saying nothing. "He's offering us the old cattle shed south of the creek," she said finally. "Says if we tear it down, the timber's ours to use." "Good joists in that shed," Kayson said. "Hard pine." Laurel folded the letter quietly. "He never gave me anything before. Maybe he's learning how." She looked up at him, eyes steady. "Or maybe he thinks I finally earned it." Kayson crouched in front of her, arms resting on his knees. "You don't owe anyone proof. Not him. Not me." Laurel let out a breath. "I know." He reached for her hand, a rough thumb brushing the side of it. "I've been thinking," he said, "about building something permanent." She tilted her head. "You mean more than fence lines and repaired harnesses?" "I mean a house, with a room for Clara where the roof doesn't leak. A porch that faces west so we can sit out when the sun goes down." Laurel didn't speak for a long time. Then she stood, pulling him up with her. "We'd need more lumber." He grinned, just a little. "Then it's a good thing your father's feeling generous." They started work the next morning. Colby helped haul the smaller beams in the cart, his arms scrawny but determined. Clara picked wildflowers along the edge of the path, tying them into bundles with twine and tucking them between the boards. Laurel handled the planning, marking out the footprint of the new house with stones and measurements drawn in the dirt. Kayson built slowly with care. He let Colby hammer in the first nail, guiding his hand without taking it from him. He didn't rush. Laurel noticed that. He measured twice, cut once, and never raised his voice. By the second week of September, the walls were up. The roof would take longer, as they had to wait for the next wagon load of shingles from the mill. But the bones of the house stood true. One evening, as the sun lay low behind the cottonwoods and the fields glowed like copper, Laurel brought a basket of bread and beans to where Kayson knelt beneath the frame. She set the food down, then glanced at the house. "It's more than I expected." He stood, wiping his hands. "It's not finished yet." "No," she said, "but I can see it now." They sat on the edge of the porch frame, eating quietly. Clara curled up on a blanket nearby, already half asleep. Colby chased a rabbit through the tall grass, laughing harder than he had in months. Laurel watched them a moment, then turned to Kayson. "I used to think love was something that came all at once, fast and bright." He looked over at her. "And now I think it's something that builds, like a house, one board at a time, and if it's real, it holds." He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Then I'll keep building." She leaned her shoulder against his. "So will I." They were married by the first frost. A quiet gathering, just the children, the neighbor girl, and Thorne, who insisted on bringing a pie. Kayson wore his cleanest shirt. Laurel stitched a ribbon through Clara's hair and let Colby carry the ring. They said their vows beneath the cottonwood tree that shaded the new porch. No preacher, no sermon, just words spoken with steady voices and eyes that didn't look away. That night, after the children were asleep and the fire in the hearth burned low, Laurel sat beside Kayson in the house they had built. The floor still held sawdust in the corners. The window panes weren't yet sealed against the wind, but there was warmth in the walls and laughter in the rooms, and her hand resting in his. Outside, the stars were clear again. Inside, everything else was too. They never looked back. Years later, the house still stood a little weathered, a little settled into the land. Clara grew into a tall girl with calloused palms and a soft singing voice. Colby learned to shoe horses and carve fence posts straight. Kayson taught them both how to read the skies and mend a broken gate. Laurel planted lilacs beside the porch, and each spring they bloomed fuller than the last. They never spoke much about the years before. Not because they forgot, because they didn't need to. What they had now was enough. And it held. Every board, every promise, every quiet moment between two hearts that had chosen, day after day, to stay.